The end of the 8th century CE marked the beginning of the Viking Age, a time when men of the north set out in their longships, raiding, trading and settling across Western Europe. No place was more impacted by their arrival than Britain. As the Great Heathen Army came in 865, it conquered large portions of eastern England, forever changing its politics, language, demographics and landscape. Yet as they threatened to take over the whole of England, one man stood in their way. King Alfred of Wessex led the English resistance, putting a stop to the Viking onslaught through battlefield victories, military reforms, and alliances with other English leaders. But the conflict between the House of Wessex and the Vikings would last until the 11th century, as they bitterly fought for dominion over England. Join us for our new series on Viking Britain, in which we will begin with the arrival of the Great Heathen Army and the Battle of Ashdown. This video is sponsored by you. Unfortunately, the YouTube environment is not great right now, with the algorithm being friendlier to drama and react channels and YouTube being permissive of AI slop. We don't do drama and we don't do AI, but thanks to our members and patrons, our channel continues to make 3 public videos per week, with the team intact and going strong. In recognition of their generosity and contributions, members and patrons receive 2 additional exclusive videos each week, and access many other perks. Join them to watch more than 250 exclusive videos covering every era of history by pressing the join button under the video or the links in the description and pinned comment. Throughout the 8th century CE, the land of England was divided into a patchwork of Christian kingdoms, including East Anglia, Mercia, Northumbria and Wessex. Their rulers fought over land, wealth, prestige and power, making and breaking alliances as it suited them. The most formidable of these kings was Offa of Mercia, who ruled the Midlands and the southeast with an iron fist. Yet it was during his reign that pirates first arrived on England's shores. In 789, 3 ships came ashore at Portland in Wessex. When word reached Æthelred, the Reeve of Dorchester, he rode out to inspect them. Assuming they were traders, he ordered them to follow him to the town to make their presence known. Yet to Æthelred's astonishment, his orders were refused. He and his men were attacked and killed on the spot. This was the first act of violence in a long age of terror and bloodshed that would forever change Britain. 4 years later, these raiders struck again, storming the holy island of Lindisfarne and raiding its monastery, one of the most sacred sites in Britain. Its relics were smashed up, its silver robbed, and most of its monks were either slain or dragged off in chains to the great slave markets beyond the sea. These terrifying raiders had braved the North Sea in shallow longships from the forests, fjords and fishing villages of Scandinavia. Scandinavia at the time was divided into a series of pagan kingdoms, earldoms and chiefdoms. The region faced significant challenges. In modern-day Norway, there was overpopulation and poor farming land. To the south, the Danes faced aggression from their mighty Christian neighbour, the Frankish Empire. These issues prompted young men, warriors, adventurers, and even powerful warlords to seek opportunities for wealth and reputation elsewhere. They set out on their longships and sailed west. They initially arrived in small groups, raiding the coasts of England, Scotland, Ireland, Frisia and Francia. Using hit-and-run tactics, they struck at unprotected sources of wealth at coastal towns or monasteries. They returned to their ships before defensive forces could be raised. With each successful raid, the Vikings, as they were later known, grew bolder, attracting greater numbers. By the mid-9th century, large fleets emerged from Scandinavia. Some raided the great southern towns of London and Canterbury, but others began to settle along the coasts they had once plundered, in the Scottish Isles and the east coast of Ireland. After defeating local rulers, they built fortified coastal bases, established new trade routes, lived off nearby farmland, and collected tribute from the native population. This breed of sea kings was here to stay. Ambitions to conquer the English kingdoms soon materialized as well. In the year 865, a vast fleet from Viking bases in Ireland, Frisia and Francia, as well as from Scandinavia, gathered in the North Sea. To the Anglo-Saxons, it was known as the Heathen, the Great Heathen Army. It likely numbered between 2,000 and 3,000 seasoned warriors. According to the Norse sagas, its leaders were Ivar the Boneless, Ubba and Halfdan, who were sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. We are told they were seeking revenge for their father's death at the hands of an English king. Their first target was the Kingdom of East Anglia, but its ruler, King Edmund, negotiated peace. To save his people, he offered food, silver, horses, and allowed the invaders to winter peacefully in his kingdom. To the north, the Northumbrians were fiercely divided. Two royal rivals, Osbert and Æthelred, both laid claim to the northern throne. This created the perfect opportunity for the Vikings to attack. In the winter of 866, the Northmen crossed the river Humber and conquered York. A Northumbrian scholar later lamented that the invaders spread themselves over the whole country and filled all with blood and grief. They destroyed the churches and the monasteries far and wide with fire and sword. Osbert and Æthelred were forced to set aside their differences, combining their armies and preparing to retake York. Attacking in March 867, they were no match for the Vikings. Both kings were killed in the fighting, and their armies were decisively defeated. The Viking leaders were now unopposed at York and its surrounding lands, appointing a pliant Northumbrian ealdorman, Ecgbert, as their vassal ruler over the lands north of the River Tyne. The following year, the Great Army turned south, entering the Kingdom of Mercia and capturing Nottingham. There they built ditches and ramparts around the town, turning it into a fortress. Observing the fate of his fellow kings north of the border, Burgred wisely decided not to take on the Great Army alone. He sent messengers south to his ally, King Æthelred of Wessex, requesting military aid. Æthelred answered the call, raising a large army to assist Burgred. Unfortunately for the English, they were not trained in siege warfare. Anglo-Saxon warfare traditionally consisted of short campaigns, based on single, decisive, pitched battles. This meant they struggled to take on Nottingham's walls in a direct attack. Nor could they maintain their armies in the field long enough to starve out the invaders. Eventually, Burgred agreed to pay tribute in silver and gold to the Vikings in exchange for their leaving his kingdom. These payments would soon become known as paying the Danegeld. Ivar, Halfdan and Ubba retreated to York. From there they divided the payment amongst themselves and planned their next conquest. In 869 they advanced southeast, piercing northwest Mercia and entering East Anglia. Ignoring their treaty with King Edmund, they seized the town of Thetford. When the king assembled his forces, he was quickly defeated. Edmund was then tracked down and brought before Ivar. Edmund was offered to rule East Anglia as a puppet of the Norsemen, much like Ecgbert in Northumbria. But the king of the Eastern Angles was a proud and devout man who refused to serve under pagans, and so he was tied to a tree, stabbed with spears, and beheaded. East Anglia now fell completely under Viking control. The Great Army now split in two. Ivar returned to York. From there, he waged war against the Britons of Altclut. In the south, the remaining army was left under the command of Halfdan. Halfdan's first act was to move against the strongest English kingdom, Wessex. In the winter of 870, he marched south and took Reading, a small town on the kingdom's northern border. This was the perfect military base. Situated on the River Thames, it could be resupplied with food and men via ship. And if the campaign failed, it offered an easy escape route. The Norsemen immediately began fortifying Reading. Guarded by the Thames to the north and the River Kennet to the east, ramparts were built around the rest of the town, converting it into a formidable stronghold. Early in the new year, Halfdan dispatched one of his earls to lead a raiding party. He was tasked with scouting the nearby countryside and finding food, slaves, silver, and anything else that might be useful. However, the local nobleman, Ealdorman Æthelwulf of Berkshire, was already rallying his army. At Englefield, he fell upon the raiders, cutting them down from their horses and slaying them in great numbers. The raid's commander was captured and executed, and the survivors scurried back to Reading. King Æthelred had been raising his own army as well, and was now ready to march north and join Æthelwulf. They met on the 4th of January 871, to the south of Reading. With the town in sight, Æthelred attacked immediately, ambushing any soldiers he found outside its walls. Despite his small-scale victories, taking the fortress was an altogether different task. As Æthelred halted to discuss strategy with Æthelwulf, he found to his surprise that Halfdan had moved first. A contemporary scholar, Bishop Asser, describes the Viking offensive. Like wolves, they burst out of all the gates and joined battle with all their might. Both sides fought there for a long time and fought fiercely. But alas, the Christians eventually turned their backs, and the Vikings won the victory and were masters of the battlefield. Ealdorman Æthelwulf was killed in the fight, and the West Saxons fled west. The Great Army's campaigns had so far followed a similar strategy. They captured a town, fortified it, crushed any local resistance, killed the local king, and then took control of his kingdom. Halfdan had done the first three. Now, with Æthelred weakened, he set out to inflict a second defeat upon him. If he could be beaten again and killed, the gates to the West Saxon kingdom, like East Anglia and Northumbria before it, may well be opened to Halfdan. On a cold, grey winter's morning on the 8th of January 871, the two armies caught sight of one another among the hills of North Berkshire at a place called Ashdown. The fate of Wessex, and maybe even England itself, hung in the balance. Although Æthelred suffered losses at Reading, his army was likely bolstered by reinforcements from Wiltshire and Hampshire. Halfdan, meanwhile, has to leave a garrison behind to defend Reading. This meant the two armies were likely similar in size, perhaps about 1,000 soldiers each. On both sides, the spear and shield were the most common choice of weapons. However, commanders and wealthier warriors wielded swords, a weapon associated with wealth and status, and often passed down from father to son. Halfdan arrived first on the battlefield, taking the higher ground. He made the first move, splitting the army into two divisions. One was to be commanded by himself and his ally, King Becgsec, and the other by a series of Viking earls. He then ordered the army to form into two shield walls, a line of soldiers who locked their shields together to guard against incoming attacks. Æthelred was watching from the lower ground. He mirrored Halfdan's strategy, dividing his army into two shield walls. One commanded by himself, opposing Halfdan and Becgsec, and the other led by his younger brother, Prince Alfred, against the earls. Before engaging in battle, Æthelred retired to his tent for mass and to pray for divine support. The English did, after all, believe God had sent the Vikings as punishment for their sins. Yet Halfdan would not idly stand by and wait for Æthelred to finish his prayers. In his moment of vulnerability, the Vikings advanced. Halfdan roared out his orders, telling his followers to march on Alfred's position. With his superior numbers, he believed he could dispatch Alfred's army first, and then turn his attention to Æthelred. The prince sent a messenger to his brother, informing him of his peril. When interrupted at prayer, Æthelred scolded the envoy, telling him that he would not forsake divine service for that of men. Without his brother, Alfred was left in command. He perhaps feared being outflanked if he waited for the Vikings to reach him. So, with his shield wall in order, he commanded his troops to march to meet the Vikings. Asser admiringly remarked that, with the rush of a wild boar, he courageously led the Christian troops against the hostile army. As the two sides grew closer, they exchanged war chants, insulting one another and calling on their god, or gods, to support them. As they came into range, missiles were fired. Arrows, javelins, and stones flew through the air, smashing at and lodging themselves into shields. Soon enough, the two shield walls clashed, with the roar of wood on wood and the clanging of steel echoing throughout the Berkshire Hills. With the shield walls in contact, frontline soldiers stabbed and poked their spears at gaps between their foes' shields, seeking to kill their opposite number. As one man fell, a second line was ready to take their place and fill the gap. This made for a slow-moving fight, a contest of strength, determination, and discipline. Alfred fought bravely on the front lines, as expected of a prince. Yet with his smaller force, he could only hope to hold off Halfdan for so long. Eventually, Æthelred arrived. With the Vikings fully engaged, he launched into their flank, cutting his way through and killing dozens of Halfdan's men. The tide had turned in favour of the West Saxon, but the Vikings held their nerve and continued the fight. Æthelred's troops now came to Alfred's side, returning the battle to a fight between the shield walls. The fight raged for several more hours, with each side pushing at weak points in their opponent's shield wall, trying to make a breakthrough. Viking casualties mounted, and their shield wall began to loosen. openings appeared in the wall and were ruthlessly penetrated by West Saxon attacks. Alfred's army burst through its gaps, and a fierce hand-to-hand combat broke out. Sidrak the Elder and his son, Sidrak the Younger, were the first Viking commanders to die. Soon enough, the remaining earls, Osbern, Freyna and Harold, were overwhelmed by Alfred's soldiers and were killed in the chaos. Æthelred likewise destroyed Halfdan's wooden wall. His followers poured through the breaches, slaughtering Halfdan's soldiers in great numbers. During the fighting, King Bagsec was butchered by West Saxon swords. Finally, Halfdan now ordered a full retreat, leading his survivors eastward. Yet, as the sun sank and the sky darkened, Æthelred chased the Viking army through the cold, gloomy Berkshire hills, cutting down stragglers from behind. For 15 miles the Norsemen fled, eventually finding refuge and safety behind the walls of Reading. Æthelred had won. For the first time, the Great Army was decisively defeated by the English. The defeat was catastrophic for Halfdan. He had imagined a short campaign and a quick victory. Instead, hundreds of his warriors lay dead, as did 6 of his most trusted commanders. It was the Great Army's first authentic taste of failure. The West Saxons, it seemed, were not to be broken as easily as the East Anglians or the Northumbrians. Yet Halfdan had not given up. 2 weeks after Ashdown, he led a raid south into the Anglo-Saxon heartlands. His target was the village of Basing, but on his approach he was met by King Æthelred's army. The two sides clashed again in a fierce battle, but this time Halfdan emerged victorious. The West Saxons retreated, and Basing's food and wealth were seized. The fighting ceased for 2 months, possibly due to the winter weather. Yet, as winter gave way to spring in late March, Halfdan began his advance deeper into Wessex. Beating Æthelred's army for a 4th time, he defeated the West Saxons at the Battle of Merton in Hampshire. It is probable that Æthelred was severely wounded at Merton. He clung to life for a few more weeks, but by late April he was dead. Æthelred had 2 sons, Æthelhelm and Æthelwold, but they were infants and too young to rule. Æthelred instead had named his younger brother Alfred as his successor. At 22 years old, Alfred was already a veteran of several battles and was immediately supported by the West Saxon Council of Ealdormen and Bishops. Yet, as the throne passed from Æthelred to Alfred, a new threat emerged. A second army, led by the Viking leader Guthrum, arrived from the continent. Sailing up the Thames, it arrived at Reading, defeated a local army, and raided throughout the countryside before joining Halfdan's army. The two Viking groups united to face Alfred in battle at Wilton. With his army outnumbered and exhausted, the West Saxons lost again. Now Alfred could no longer hope for a military solution. So, after a long 4-month campaign and 7 bloody battles, he offered to negotiate peace with the Vikings. Like Edmund and Burgred before him, he paid Danegeld to Halfdan to secure his departure from Wessex. The Vikings' demands would no doubt have been extortionate, but Halfdan had suffered heavy casualties too, and ultimately failed to take Wessex, despite his victories. The payment from Wessex would allow him to reward his loyal followers for that year's campaign, and help him secure control of East Anglia and Northumbria. Halfdan returned to Reading, and in the autumn of 871 sailed back up the Thames to take control of Mercian London. The victory at Ashdown had been all-important in the survival of the Kingdom of Wessex, both physically and symbolically. If Halfdan had broken Æthelred's army in Berkshire, he might have had the momentum to take control of the West Saxon throne. More than that, the West Saxon victory demonstrated that the Great Army was not invincible, giving hope to the English in future battles. Alfred knew peace would not last. The Vikings would return. For now, however, he could take solace in the fact that they had finally left Wessex, and he would survive for another day. A fate much better than that of Edmund of East Anglia or Aelle and Osbert of Northumbria. Our series on Viking Britain and Alfred's struggle against the Great Army will continue in the coming weeks, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.